Hello everyone, welcome to the 34th webinar in 12D's training webinar series, and the first for 2018. My name is Lisa Stewart, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at 12D Solutions. 12D's training webinars showcase common industry challenges, taking a close look at industry best practices and how these can be implemented using 12D products. The aim of these webinars is to upskill 12D users and broaden their understanding of the capabilities of 12D products. We run these webinars regularly and record them for posting through our website and on YouTube. The first 33 webinars from this training series, as well as the 30 webinars from our Industry Solutions series, are available on our YouTube channels if you missed those. During this live presentation, you'll be able to type your questions along the way. We'll put some instructions on the screen. We'll answer as many of those as possible throughout the webinar. At the end, I'll also read out some of your questions to the presenter for his insights if there's time. Today's webinar on ADAC will be presented by Peter Tainton, who has over 20 years of experience in various facets of road design. He's been engaged in large projects for several major councils and government road authorities. Over the last 16 years, he's worked closely with our programmers in the implementation of a variety of design features within 12D Model. This webinar will give an overview of the ADAC process within 12D Model. We will cover ADAC XSD and Definitions, as construction and design, asset creation and mapping, ADAC Utilities, data processing and validation using the ADAC Manager, ADAC XML output and input, and attribute labeling. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So ADAC stands for Asset Design as Constructed, and it's controlled by the IPWA, and you can search for that on your website. So the Asset Design as Constructed, so it's a vendor-independent XML format. There's about 68 assets and growing. The format's controlled by IPWA. It's in an XML format. And it's for survey-accurate data, the typical one source of truth. It's already implemented and by various councils and water authorities. And it also, ADAC involves designers and surveyors, but generally surveyors at this moment. So XML file, just a markup language and so forth. The definition is controlled by a schema, an XSD file. You can also scoot through these. So that gives you an idea what they look like. That's the XML file with matching start and end tags, and basically that's the ADAC. But to make that XML file usable, there's an ADAC schema, and so here's the ADAC assets, and for this one here for a sewage maintenance hole, and there's all information assets available and how you pick them up. So this help file is available on the IPWA website. So the ADAC asset geometry is defined via a point, a polyline, or a polygon, and some of those assets also allow arcs. So that is the way that you pick things up and define things for the ADAC assets. So point geometry for something like a sewage manhole would just be a simple XY point. So each of the attributes are defined. Some are by integer, real, text, some by drop-down lists, and so forth, but there is usually quite a few choices. So here we're looking at a rectangular sewer manhole, and we're looking at the length and the width, and if they're to be defined in millimeters, it shows you on that screen. So we're looking at the XML file. So 12D then allows editing of those assets. There's also a process that the councils and authorities go through as to what is defined by those assets and what they need to pick up. And they're all set out in the ADAC Asset Capture Guidelines for each council, and it should be available on each council website. So that would be something like this. So for a particular transport thing, you might be looking at a polygon for roadways, footpaths, and pavement. So just a simple diagrams on to show the ASCON surveyors how they expect these things to be picked up. For instance, the stormwater end structure, it's only a one-point option in ADAC. So is that one point at the invert or the top of the culvert? And it's the top of the culvert as shown here. So we're looking at the ADAC editing inside 12D. So again, we've got validations. We can create header information, which is information about the survey and the in horizontal formats and AHD vertical. We can create reports, XML files that can import and export the ADAC XML file. So basically, our workflow in 12D starts with the preparation of the data, or at least getting the data, preparing the data, and setting attributes and all the information that the ADAC is required by the particular authority, and then synchronizing that back to the output. So it is an option where we utilize the ADAC mapping file to speed things up, and we'll have a look at that when we get into the 12D project. So that's our workflow, and again, there's documentation available on the ADAC. It's quite comprehensive, but obviously some of the courses like this and training courses that we do are quite useful. So we drop into 12D. So in the processes of working with ADAC, we've found that the data that users get comes to them in various ways, and those ways can be like a data input as a DWG, where any real information other than the name is really lacking on that data. We also find that even the names change from drawing to drawing, so you can't even be consistent in what you're getting per input. And then obviously there's the data pickup by the as-constructed surveyor, who uses codes and names and often attributes that define the asset. So the type of data you receive plays a large role in the processing of that data. The DWG data, right, will be repetitive, and as it's really defined, as I said, in the same manner. Where the survey ASCON data can be automated in our process using map files, because the surveyor uses standard codes and attributes. So under our setup, there's ADAC tools. There's the toolbars available. So in this one here is 4.1, 4.2. There's also an actual ADAC utility. So I've docked those. I'm working on 4.2 survey in this particular project. So again, with that, the council capture guidelines is what they actually want and what they actually need is sometimes a little bit hard, because all it is a PDF file. So we have a user attribute file that you can access in your library. So say 42 example council requirements, but I've already read that in and changed a few things to suit my particular job. So if I read that in, this file will give you a direct link to all the ADAC assets. So I click on here, I can go right mouse button, and it gives you a direct drill down to the particular asset you're after, and what you want to do with that particular asset. Now, when we edit the assets later on, you'll find that there's some of the fields are nillable. It means you can just tick them on, tick them off, but that's not all of them. A lot of the fields have choices as drop-down lists. They have values you have to type in. So we've come up with this system here in 12D to set particular catchwords or words that we would look for when we run our mapping file in conjunction with this council requirement. So in the file from your user library, you can look through all these ones are here. So you just got to have the council PDF file available and work your way through it. So anything that's, as I said, nillable, that's an asset you can just tick on, tick off. We have that here. You can just tick that box if the council wants it. If it doesn't have that ability to be able to just tick on and tick off, then you have to say whether or not it's required or NA not required. So for text options or drop-down lists that are text-orientated, we use the word required or NA. So here we're just saying that the council doesn't want these, so we put NA in there. For real values and integer values, we've come up with the option where if you require it, you have to type in an actual value, not a text value. So we type in -999 for the ones that the council does want, and -333 for any of the ones that the council doesn't want. So that way, you set up a whole file that references what that particular council wants or doesn't want. So again, that file then allows and links through all our ADAC Utilities options. So if we go, and we'll have a look at these later on, but if we go to stormwater, and here we've got an option to say what version you are running. The version can be set in your environment file. So if you go under your project ENV and search for ADAC, you can set a path or take the path out totally. If you take the path out totally, every time you run these options inside 12D, you'll be prompted for what version of ADAC that you want. So we're doing version 2, and we go set. So with this system here and all these options, if I access my council file, so when I go to a PIT, all the things that the council doesn't require from that file are grayed out, and you don't have to worry about. All the things that are available as a choice here or an entry, the council does require. So that's the link between the council requirement file and our ADAC assets. So the processing of ADAC in 12D runs through a chain options. We have options to set up and prepare views for processing of the data, and those chains are shipped with 12D. So being a chain requires some sort of standard naming, but it is minimal. If you're going to work in your working folder, we refer to that as our local area, and that word local is passed to particular file names. So there's a few little syntax like that you have to be aware of. So when you work in your user library, you can utilize the word in the naming of all your mapping files and so forth with the word userlib instead of user as without the underscore. So what I basically mean by that is if I look at some of our files here, and I'll look at a map file we're going to generate in a moment, you'll see that it's got a syntax like this: ADAC local map survey to ADAC 42. So that syntax is imperative because options in the chain are passed through, and then this file is looked for via the chain. So if you're doing a 41, you just change the 42 to 41. If you're doing a design, you change the word survey to design. So, and this is all defined in that in the ADAC help files. So before we get started on the processing of data, we best have a look at the various ADAC assets and what they actually require and what they do look like. So inside our menu system over here, and this is a menu pin from file ADAC, so it sits under here. So basically we've got these utilities options. Some of the options are under utilities, not out on plain ADAC menus because you don't use them very often. So in this particular one here, there's a XSD to model. So when you run the XSD to model, you specify the ADAC version that you're interested in, and 12D will then read in and create sample assets from that file. So what this allows you to do is to look at all the assets that are available in ADAC inside 12D. So we utilize that using our editor. So if we pick one of the assets, which in this case is a series maintenance hole, it allows us to use the inbuilt editors inside 12D and give you a bit of an idea and look through each asset and find out what you're in for, what sort of things you have to pick up and so forth. Some things are just entered with the first list or default, some with the words null there, so this is not really the processing part of 12D, this is just information for you. So again, you've got things like information on the level, wall construction, all sorts of things. So you can work your way through and have a look at the assets. It's always good to know what all these assets are and what they expect. Maybe not just work on the ones that you're doing at the time. Be aware of where a particular feature that you've surveyed or designed and what category it belongs to in ADAC. So again, there's I've just toggled the vertices and the string names on here so you can see. So you'll notice that some of them are polygons like this, and some are have a line there with arcs showing a road edge, subsoil drains, footpaths, water supply, for instance. So you can see that there's quite a bit of particular assets. Stormwater. So there probably be the few that you're interested in to start with, but be aware that there are other ones there as well. It does allow you to become familiar with all the assets, not just the ones that you're working on at the time. So as I mentioned before, the data can come from different sources. You said you can have a DWG input, which is lacking any other information other than the name, or a ASCON survey. So we'll have a look at the non-survey, as I like to refer to it as, a data that's come in. So all that's on that data, there's no attributes or anything information, there's only just a name. So then you have to go and produce some asset information from it. So you could then go through, add names, and then look at the mapping option we're going to do on the actual survey ASCON data. But there is a method to get it out, but it is one asset at a time. As I said, it is a method, but probably not the best one. So in that case there, I can go create asset, and I can select the version I want, and I can pick the asset. Then I have to say what sort of asset is it. So I've got to go to the drill down, I go to stormwater, I go all the way to pits, and I grab pit. And I go create. And I've got to go do another one, the pipe, and so forth. So obviously the way I'm referring to this is not the best way to do it, but if that's the process or the data you have, there may be no other way out for you. So it creates the asset, obviously with not much information filled out. Okay, there's no information about the pit number, service level, depth, all those sorts of things. And when 12D does run the ADAC through the chains, and you will be able to run that data through a chain, but we won't be using a mapping file. But it still will fill out a few things for you. So the chain in 12D will work out a surface level, or work out a grade of a pipe, for instance, or a length and that sort of stuff. But it won't know about invert levels, and therefore it can't calculate a depth. So there are a few things that it can't do, but it will do something for you. So if we have that particular asset, and we won't edit all these, we just edit that one there, and we now want to be able to run the data, and so obviously you should be able to come under here and set some utilities, some information about the asset, rather than just running and then finding out you have to fill in those information anyway. So in that case there, you'd come to your ADAC, and under the ADAC 2 menu, there's an option to set up your project for a survey. So when I go and set up my project for the survey, it creates a couple of views for me. One view is called Survey to Map to ADAC, and that's where I add my data to. So if I add my non-survey data to that view, and when I run the chain to process all this data, it will appear in the survey ready for ADAC. So this is my actual data, and either read in or survey, and then it will produce the data over here. So if I run the chain, which actually produces the local survey chain, it will turn around and run some data for me. Okay, so that information in the process is ADAC information. So if I use the ADAC Manager to go and select that little pit that we're working on, and I load that in, then the stormwater pit is there. Right, so there's a few things missing. Okay, there's no name for the pit. We haven't set that. There's no invert level, so hence there's no depth. So there's a few things missing, but there are a couple other things. But some of those things that you see in those lists there, or what's been put here, is possibly only just the first thing that was in the data list. So you can actually go back into your survey to map to ADAC and run some utilities on that data and set a bit more information. I'll just show you how it works here. We're not going to run through. We're going to work on our real data. So I go to 4.2 and go set. Then basically I'd look at the council file, and I go through and pick that pit, and I go down to here and I fill in all the information that I need about it, what its use was, fabricated, outlet type, fire retardant, no, pit shape, circular size. So there's quite a lot of things. You have to fill all those out manually. because you're not using a mapping file, you're not using any of the benefits from a survey names and attributes. You're just doing it on data that only has name orientation. So it's quite a bit of work, and again, you have to do it for each asset, and when the data comes in the next day, you've got to do it all over again. So obviously, the data we really want to work on is the survey data. So the survey ASCON will access names and codes. So if we go back and look at our XSD model, and we'll add in some data I prepared before. Right, so all I've done here is, and this is what you have to do for as you build up your mapping file inside 12D. I've copied the assets down that I'm interested in. So in that case, I've copied down some water mains and some hydrants and pipes. In the stormwater one, I've copied down some pits, head wall, and some pipes, and maybe an RCB. And I've given it names that is in my survey. So these are the names or the codes I'm using out in the field. So I've set those. So when I run my map file option over this, it will then set up a mapping file. So every time I bring in data that's called, it has a manhole called DRMH or a head wall or a pipe, it will then apply all the ADAC assets that it can, all in one go, not one asset at a time. So in the survey field, we can have names or codes, or you can have individual codes for each one of these, depending on what the surveyor is doing. But they also can set attributes to this data. So in this case here, the pit shape was able to be picked up in the field. So, and it was the choice for the surveyor was rectangular. He was also able to pick up pit length and pit width, so a bit of information about the actual asset. So again, if we pick the other one, it's a pit shape is circular and it's got a pit diameter. So there's a bit of extra information other than the name that the surveyor was able to use in for stormwater, for instance. He may not be able to do it for every asset, but for the stormwater one, he was able to do that. So with the asset I might pick here, sometimes there's a few things or a value or a field in the asset that the surveyor may know out in the field, and he can pick it up. And all the name here may reflect as we can see here, type bitumen. And the other one below would be a type B1 curb. So there may be a couple of things that he can set in the field that automatically define what that particular asset is. So we've got some options to safeguard those sorts of things as well. So surveyor has a lot more tools available to him to define the pickup in the field, and that then relates through to an easy process for you as the person to prepare the data for ADAC. So with that information, we have our data that we're going to add to as the time goes by. We've got our council UAF requirements, and we're going to now merge all those together. So it's under there's this menu here. There's also an option under here, user menu. It's called ADAC strings to map file, and it uses a UAF. So what that means is that it allows you to pick your data. So this would be the data that I would pick. So this data can be ever growing as well. You can have this in a user area or user library, read it in, add to it, and so forth, and you don't have to be able to do it all at once. I picked the version that I'm after, and I picked a council requirement file. So again, I pick up that council requirement 4.2, and I'm now going to look at the map file. So again, this is the actual syntax, ADAC local map survey to ADAC 42. So what I've talked about before was some of the options that the surveyor may have set was a particular code, and he was able to say that the type of asset was edge of bitumen and so forth. So we need to be able to protect them or have an override. So this is what this map override or UAF file is all about. So if we just before we run it, we'll have a look at that file. So I'll look at my override. It's not always a big file, depending on how much the surveyor uses this idea. And all it basically says that every label has a KL or EB. I want you to ignore the type and use the one that the surveyor had as the asset. Otherwise, I'll just replace it all with the council requirements, like required NA -999 -333. But there will be some times where you want the option that you set to be safeguarded. So if we go and have a look at our map file, so these are all the attributes for ADAC are string attributes. So under attributes, string. So here we've got all the ADAC attributes that are going to be set, and here's all the codes. So again, you can see that this one here is actually a manhole. It's using the attribute that we talked about, the pitch shape. So it's now going to do something different for this particular attribute defined on what this says. So it says it's an extended pit. So this attribute's now looking for a extended attribute data. This is actually a rectangular pit, and that's a circular pit. So different attributes are being set for the particular type of pit. So again, if I go to the exhibition one, and I look at the map file, and I'll see the type. So it's safeguarded the option that you set there. But length and this sort of stuff, if I go and pick other information like the manhole, I go down to ADAC and I look at other things. You see it's got values in there, required -999. So there's lots of things like that will go through and target your processing and validation and let you know that you should have filled in that field. But the one that you wanted to safeguard, the edge of bitumen and the KL, have been set. So once you've got the map file, you're basically looking at processing your data. So again, with the survey and things that come in, you've as long as the surveyor sticks to the fairly standard naming convention and coding, you can run your data as all in one process. So again, we run those chains and go and set our data up. So not all the data that you've read in or the surveyor has picked up is available in the field. He may know some things about sizes and a couple of different things, but there are always things in the ADAC process you have to do after the survey data reduction. And again, they're looking at these tools here, these sorts of things. So one of the things, options you'll have is preparing your data. So under this data prep, I've got some information on there, and we're going to work our way through a few of them. So the lots and information, the lot boundaries. A lot of times you have this. You probably have got somewhere some text defining where those blocks, what the actual lot numbers are. Excuse me. So long as you've got something like that, a bit of text defining what the lot number is in the middle of those lots, you can run this next option. So this is preparing your data for ADAC on the things that you weren't able to pick up in the survey ASCOM field. So there's a set lot numbers. So again, it just looks at the model of the lots. So you pick that, and these lot numbers, there's just a bit of text, and the plan number, so whatever that may be, and process. So what it basically does, it goes and sets attributes for each one of those strings. So this is working on your real data. So if I go F8 and pick on that, then it's going to set things like the lot number, the plan number, and the rounded off plan area for you. So basically, each one of those attributes is then allowed for in the process of the ADAC to set fields in your ADAC asset. One of the other ones that we look at, because this is ASCON, it's not a network as such. So the pits and the pipes come in as separate things. So again, you've got to look at line numbers and pit numbers for that. So as long as you've got some sort of a bit of text defining where those manholes are, otherwise you type them in manually yourself. You can go into here and you can go set pit number attribute from text. That's a simple little thing. So it just basically says what's your model of pipe strings, and you simply just go pick. So it says pick the manhole and pick the bit of text. So pick the manhole and the bit of text that refers to the name of the manhole. For someone that's used to doing a drainage network, that all comes part of it. That's more in the actual design field. But for the survey type of thing, this is about the only way you can go and set them automatically. Otherwise, you've got to type them in manually for each asset. So a simple little option to be able to just go and set some attributes. So if I go and look at the attributes in 12D, it's now set the actual pit number for it as well, along with the ones that the surveyor picked up in the field. One of the things that's also asked for, this is just a point in the field, and the pipe next to it might actually reflect the invert level inside the pit, but obviously those two things aren't connected. So inside here we set that we connect those things via attributes. So if we're looking at setting pit invert levels or as attributes from pipes, so we look at the number of points we got, and we pick up that, and we look at the pipe strings. And it turns around, so I'm doing stormwater, and it's going to try and find the closest pit level. So I run that. And again, if we look at our attributes for that particular pits now, it's now got information about the invert level of the pit, not something that may have been picked up in the field. If I also pick up the pipe, the same ADAC utility option that we just used also knows about the pipe and sets a attribute for the upstream level and downstream level taken from the pit at either end. So those sorts of tools, being able to go and set information about your ADAC. So as I said, it's not all of us. We need to see a few things and find out what our ADAC, what we're missing. So in the data to add, we'll just send across our data prep, so we just send across that information and probably a bit of the pit. So our survey to map to ADAC is the information that's ready, that we've gone to set some attributes to using the ADAC Utilities options, and then we run our ADAC. So again, from the icon, local survey to ADAC. So we go to there and bit of data. So it's good. It's a good check that if something is on this view and doesn't appear on that view, then there's a good chance that there was an exact chance that the data on the other view is the wrong name, or it's missing an attribute, or something's not inside the map file to then allow it to process through the chains into ADAC. Rather than editing each individual asset, we can go to the ADAC Manager, and we can look at the whole model of the data and load that up. So we're looking at our pits. So you see here the pits that I did up the top there, I missed a few. So they've got the word required in there, so it's something I have to do. I also haven't run anything else on the pits. I haven't looked at on this option here, I haven't looked at the status or use or all that sort of stuff. It's set some information in relation to the surface level. It's taken the invert level and calculated the depth for me. And then I have to go and fill this part out here. So it just shows you that you've just missed a few things. Again, upstream infill, downstream, grade, 12D works all that out for you. There's just a few things here that you were supposed to do. So if you always go back to your survey to map to data or data prep, depending which one you want to work on. So if I look at my information that I've missed, so I go to stormwater, set 4.2. Now I pick my data, so I can pick one at a time, or I can pick a model, or I can do a selection. So if some of these things are different, I can use the data pick up here to pick what I'm after, inside rectangles or lassos, whatever it may be. I pick up the council requirement file, and I then go to my pipe. So again, all I have to fill in is what's the information about what it is, the standard, number of cells for the pipes is 1. The pipe structure is circular. It's already been picked up by the code, but these things haven't. So is it an RCP? What class is it? And the joint type. I get a process. So I then go and pick the manholes and things like that. I can go to pit and again fill in information about the particular option I'm after. So I'm talking about pit shape, circular. I already got the diameters. So I get process. So again, I then run my chain. So I go back to my survey ready for ADAC. Bring up my manager now, and then now search through the ADAC ready data. I've now got on here pipes and pits. So I've now got information already filled in about these things, where those things before weren't there. So now it knows what the material is and the class type and the joint type and the number of cells and so forth, along with all the other things that 12D automatically did for you, like the grade and length and all those sorts of things. So again, it's quite an easy process inside 12D to set the things that weren't available at the survey pickup. So some of that information may be addressed from different sources, so it may take a little bit of a time, but once you have the data available and you know that it's truthful, you can then go and set it via the ADAC Utilities. So again, under those, the Utilities option, there's a couple of specialised type ones. So under here, there's a set sewer connection attributes. Now, some of these are quite difficult. Not all councils want them. So that if you look in your asset capture guidelines and everything and the council doesn't want them, then great. But if they do, this is a tool that will allow you to pick them up in the field. And some of them are quite complicated. So this option says pick the end of the connection, and it then says select the sewer line. So I picked the sewer line here. It says I picked the downstream manhole. The arrow shows you where the downstream manhole is. So previously I've already set the attributes for all this information to do with the sewer, just like I did with the stormwater. So I set the pit numbers and the line numbers for the pipe under those utilities. So I pick the chainage option. So what that does, it dimensions the distance from the downstream manhole to the actual house connection. And I've got the IO distance, which is the distance from downstream manhole to this point. I'm talking about an offset. So I pick an offset here. And then the nearest boundary is that boundary there, and then the next nearest boundary is that one. So you can adjust these values and round them off if you wanted to, but then basically just go set. And that information is then stored on the string itself. So you can then go through and do each one of those attributes. It is a time-consuming process, but you don't usually pick up 100 house connections in one day. So you can go through and do each one. So again, the processing of the ADAC is via your mapping file. And again, some of those attributes that were set on the original data that have already come through to you. So if I go and press my attribute on this, there's information like diameter, and the other one was for the square pits was length and width and so forth. So those attributes were set in the field as well. So how do they transfer through to ADAC for me? And that runs under a file called local 42. So I'm doing it in version 4.2. So I read that in. It's a simple little file that just basically says what asset and what string attribute that the surveyor set are you going to use. So for these couple of things here, it's going to use these extra attributes to define them. So just saves you having to go and set it for every single one. As long as this file exists, you can just keep on adding to it, and every time you run your job, if the data has that attribute, it will go and set this information in relation to your ADAC. So basically, if your ADAC ready data, so again, if we look at our survey to map to ADAC, and we add a bit more information on. and again we run our chain. There's the information to go across to ADAC. There is you'll see this little header option here. So what that header is all about is just a point you can create. I just added text to it. So basically there it just says information about the name, the council, whatever it is, and the coordinate system. It's got some good little tips here, tool tips, so you can actually pick in there, and then it tells you information about what you're supposed to type in for the GDA and what the vertical datum is and so forth. So that bit of information goes across into reporting and things like that. So again, when you look at your manager now, you can individually look at some data, or you can look at the whole model. So load that in. You go into the sewer manhole, pick that back and forwards into some of the ones I haven't ran all the little information on. So you see the still saying required, but all this sort of information. So you can actually validate. So if I look at that, I can go validate, and there's no errors on that string, on that particular pick, so I filled everything in properly. So if there is an error, so I go into here and I go validate, obviously, you may get a few errors on that. So some good situations you'll find that a PIT number here, it did an error on this. Okay, so in that particular case, there's no reason why you can't call a PIT number the word required. So there are some times where the word required does fall through the net. So if that is the case, there is actually a business rule validator over here, which allows you to go on and search through that ready for ADAC data, and it can go and look for the word required and validate. It'll go and find some of the things that you missed. Obviously, I haven't done all these other pipes and so forth, so there's quite a few of them. But it will look for any asset that has the word required on it. So if I had finished everything but I'd missed this PIT name, it would then find this one and you'd straight away know that there's no PIT called required. It could also happen for things like street names and all sorts of things. So it's just a good little validator based on those rules. So again, you can individually validate and check your data using the ADAC Manager. And it's just a matter of process of going back and forwards and finding out some information about something that you've missed, and setting it, and then rerunning the survey to map to ADAC, and coming back into here. If you do look at the assets and so forth for this information, the same process would be done on your non-survey data. It's just that when you go and pick the things like stormwater on here, and I say 4.2, so when I go and pick things like that on these sorts of stuff, so if I go pick on that and grab information about the council file, go into the PIT, maybe set some things, and I go process, it'll say that that's ADAC data. Okay, so it's just a safeguard to say that you shouldn't do that on your process data over here, ready for ADAC. But in this case here, we're using the non-survey data, so we're having to say, yes, we created the asset manually, and we're now trying to set some things for it as well. So we'll prompt you and say, do you really want to continue with this? And you can say yes, and then we'll go and set the attributes, and then you run the chain, and it goes through the same process. So there's a bit of a safeguard, so that if you do sometimes edit the data ready for ADAC, you've got to remember that that data gets deleted and reran or recreated every time you run the local survey to ADAC chain. So there's no use editing anything in here. It's always your real data that you edit. So under here, there's all sorts of information on the on reporting. So you can report to a file. So you can simply just pick up something like that. You can say it's 4.2 HTML and report that. So in that information, there's all information about the PIT and all the stuff that you entered, and anything else that the council doesn't want, you didn't have to fill out. So on the exporting of a XML file, it's just simply the same process. You go and pick your data, whether it's all of it or not, what version you've got. You pick the header file. That's just to have the information again about the horizontal coordinates and vertical coordinates. And you put an XML file and it writes out the XML file. So it's pretty well like that. Right, so there's also a good option in 12D to read in an XML file. So it's always good practice to create another project and read the file that you just wrote out into the new project, and just to go and check it and validate it and things like that before you send it off to the council. So again, in the editing your data and managing it back and forwards, there's enough under the options using map files and all the utilities here for you to get all the information about your ADAC asset to the council via that XML output. There's also a ADAC labeling option, which will label things on the screen for you. So if you have a look under user, there's a few other things that here you might see a few chains. Generally, we don't run those. Then normally we run our chains from the icons up here, from the toolbars. So these other ones are basically for debugging. If anything happens, we use that from a support point of view. So if I look at my attribute labels, so again, there's a attribute ADAC label file and a label option. So this is a file, so I'll set one up for 4.2 and I read it in. So what it allows you to do is to label all the ADAC information that you want. You simply just tell whether it's a point or whether it's a point in the leader. And there's a bit of a demonstration on this and on the 12D website under the what's new in version 12. So again, you want to label the manhole number, service level, upstream level, downstream, diameter, and so forth. And what are you going to call it? Number of places. What name do you want to put over here for the model that goes on? You know, the prefix before it, manhole, and such, and that's how you create the file. Whenever you put an entry in here, all you have to do is make sure that you, when you finish these particular entry, you have to say group end, so that it knows that this one here is the end of this group. So when you go and run that label file or apply it, you grab your and you grab the label file. You can go and work out information on independently on each one. You can tick things off, say, I only want to label this, I only want to label that. But we'll just label everything. So if I add in everything with the word label in it, just using the search bar in version 12 there. And again, and if I look at the settings, these are all paper size text. So if I type in 250 there, I've got a realistic size for it. So all this sort of information about the lots, the lot number, where it came from, information about the pipes, downstream, so all that sort of stuff can be done with mapping. If you do move these leaders away and any text away from where it should be, this remembers that smart text, so when it runs, it won't go and put them back where you had them. Good little check. Actually, sometimes you actually see that I've missed something on that valve, and it's asking for the actual required type of valve or something. So that's still a good little check, even though you do have the tools under Manager and so forth to be able to run all these things. So the application of ADAC is not difficult if you're willing to have a good survey pickup, a good map file, and so forth. It'll make things a lot easier for you. Just quickly under the design side, not necessarily requested as much as what the survey is, but from the design point of view, it works the same way. So in the design world, you have a drainage network, and you also have certain strings in your design that are going to ADAC. Not all of your strings in design will go to ADAC. So you'll have like edge of bitumen strings, you have footpath strings, drainage networks, as I mentioned, polygons that come from design and all those sorts of things. So you will get information from your design out of your MTF file that is ready to go to ADAC. And they have names just like your normal ASCON survey pickup. So under that process there, you still will have to generate a map file similar to what I did with the survey one, but it's called design. So this one's a 4.1. So if I read that in, So under here, you wouldn't expect to have a lot of design ones going across, but generally that's how they are, and that they work on the same names. So these names, there's a name that came out of our polygons, out of our apply many. So it isn't too hard to work out which strings are to go to design ADAC. So it runs through the same process. It uses the ADAC design icon or toolbar rather than the survey one. So again, it picks up selects and views for you, and it creates ones called design. So again, if I look at my data that I'm going to send, maybe that data there, I'm interested in that. So I run my chain again, which is my local design to ADAC, pick up the design ready for ADAC, and the information's there. So if I go to my manager, select my model, load, I've now got all the information about the pits and so forth. So you'd expect a lot more of that information to be available via the network. Road edges, for instance. I've got a road edges for, as constructed, it's a B1 type. The other ones are M1 for mountable curve and B1, traffic islands. So it's the same process for doing design as you do for existing survey pickup. So thank you very much for all attending, and again, Lisa will discuss the fact this is webinar will be available on the 12D website for you.
Thanks, Peter. I'll, if you're happy, I might just read out a couple of the questions that came through.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael in Brisbane asked, how do you run the ADAC set lot attributes chain if there are many different plan numbers?
Yeah, well, basically you've just got to go on when you do that data source, and you have to have the lots and everything on a different model. So that's all there is to it. Yeah, so you have to have all those lots on plan number 1257, and the other lots have been on a different model, and they'll then set that plan number. You know, it's probably not. You know, that's about all you can really do for it in relation to the option. So if I look at the auto lot numbers. It only ever asks for model. Okay, so you just have to have those lots on a different model. That's all.
Okay, and Jeff in Queensland said, where are the ADAC versions available? I heard there's a version 5.
Okay, so as I said before when I first started, the ADAC is controlled by IPWA. So in that case here, there is the IPWA website. So if you go to there and type in a search for ADAC, there's all information about ADAC, outcoming versions, information. You see there's a whole consortium of councils and authorities there, and you can go and have a look at that. You can even join the consortium. And there's a bit of a spiel there about what they do. And again, they're saying there that version 5 is out. Necessarily, just because it's out doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be adopted or requested by every council straight away. A lot of times there's a bit of discussion that goes back and forth between the consortium about things that have gone in there that they may or may not be happy with. So once the version 5 is requested by a council and the version 5 is ready to go, it'll be shipped with 12D and automatically available in the drop-down list and everything inside 12D.
Wonderful. Okay, the other questions that came through are a little more specific, I think, so we might get back to those guys by email.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who sent through questions on the way through. As we've said, the recording of this webinar will be available in coming days through our website and our YouTube channel. Our next 2 training webinars are Recording Chains for Surveyors on the 7th of February and Drainage Plan Plot on the 21st of February. So feel free to sign up for those through our website. We're also running an ADAC training courses in Brisbane on 6th of February, and then I think the next one's the 21st of March. And I think we'll have more dates for those throughout the year if you're not available for either of those. So get in touch with our Queensland training team if you're in Brisbane and you'd like to attend those. We'll keep you posted on all of that through email and social media if you're subscribed as well. And if you need to contact us in the meantime, our details are on the screen now. That concludes our presentation for today. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at future webinars.